Good evening and happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to our newest installment of Unfiltered Conversations.
It didn't work. Fuck it.
Why didn't it work? Lincoln was right there. Put his statue back up then. I saw him looking earlier. Go ahead and put him back up. There
I was not expecting that beginning.
I wasn't either, but that's how we're starting off tonight, folks. But we're really glad to be here tonight and have another opportunity to go live and chat with you guys. And really excited to have our member Tim back on for an episode. It has been a long time since you've been on an Unfiltered Conversations.
Good to see you, mate.
Super excited to have you a part of this one, especially with a topic like Shiloh, because I was thinking like Tim is just the perfect person to have come on and talk about Shiloh. As Lincoln's readjusting himself, they're getting us going. Anthony and Josh are also joining as usual. They have become staples of this episode, and this is the way we do this, so it's always good to have them as well. All right, housekeeping is done. Guys that are watching at home, feel free to chime in at any point. We love to hear from you and engage with you guys. Let's go around and see how everybody's doing first. Daz, what's up, dude?
Yeah, good. I'm doing very well, thank you.
That's what I like to hear. And then Anthony over there on the right.
Having some nice pretzels.
Okay, there we go. Lincoln.
Oh, hey. Oh, sorry. He's in the way. I'm good.
He went off to the theater.
Partaking of moonshine. It was excellent.
Very good to see you having that.
Not illegal. Not illegal. I bought it legally.
From the
one of them store-bought ones.
Stores in Pennsylvania? Or is it like you do?
He bought it.
No, they have
mountains.
Regular liquor stores.
Okay.
Not like Virginia where they have the ABC stores, which are annoying.
Yeah, it can be.
They don't in Maryland where you can go down the street and then at the corner, 2 blocks for 4 blocks and 5 blocks is a liquor store every single block. Just like DC. Yeah. DC's the same way too.
Again, I guess that's how you get your syntax in. You have all that just kind of lined up and available. Why not? It's revenue.
If you go to Catoctin Mountain Park, they have a historic moonshine still.
Really? Question: is the cookie you're eating legal, Anthony? Because we're a bit concerned.
Well, I finished it already. It's already. If it wasn't,
you're onto the pretzels now.
Yeah.
Calling the cops.
Tim, how's everything on your end, man? It's been a long time since we've had you on here. So how's everything going?
It's great. Glad to be back.
Yeah.
Miss being on. So
it's good to have you. Like I said, I'm really excited to pick your brain on Shiloh tonight. But Darren actually has brought us into our immediate topic at hand, which is going to kind of be our segue into everything tonight, including the Dartmoor prison. What are we reading? Tim, I should have probably asked you that before I had to come on. But if you have something you're reading right now that you'd like to share with us, we go around and do a quick just overview of what we're reading. And I'm actually going to have Daz go last because he's going to help us, again, move into the next topic that we have before we get to Shiloh. So, Anthony, you're going to lead us off tonight because you had a pretty hefty stack ahead of you. So what are you reading? What's going on in your
It's a stack of I don't know what I'm going to read. Please tell me, because I'm going to read it in 2 days.
I
That's a reader, bro.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I have finished all my preparations for a trip that I have next week of up to Massachusetts. So I've done all that anti-British reading. So I'm very happy going into. It's going to be interesting. But I've switched it back to the mid-19th century, and I'm curious why he calls them the Immortals, even though it's General Lee's Immortals, and I'm very interested of why immortal, even though the Lost Cause would have you believe that they are anything but immortal after having shot the great man per the Lost Cause. So I'm very curious how this will read.
You sound like you're being recorded in the 1860s.
Well,
photograph.
Yeah. That's what I'm reading.
And Daz, I'm really quickly, I'm just getting that we are not live on the American Civil War UK history for some reason. So I am trying to, if you have
That's all right.
the
No, that's
availability to
fine.
share it
I'll-
over to that
I'll
page.
just share it over.
All right,
Yeah.
perfect, cool. So we'll get that in there as well. I want to make sure our folks are here. Did someone say Shiloh? Looks like Readout Productions is on to say hello again. How you doing over there, buddy?
Hello.
Yes, we did. We will be
Rhymes
talking.
with Shiloh.
Thank you, Josh. Sorry to cut you off, dude. I just wanted to make sure we got our other friends on the American Civil War page. General Immortals.
I'm also looking for, after this, I'm hoping to dive into Timothy B. Smith's ever-growing library of Western theater.
Well, you and Tim
So-
can talk a lot about that because he's
Can't go wrong with Tim Smith.
And the American
Tim Smith
Battlefield
of the
Trust,
West.
they just put out a really nice 2-hour-long driving tour of Shiloh
Mhm.
yesterday.
Yeah,
Mhm.
2 hours with Tim Smith. It was pretty awesome.
Oh,
That was a
wow.
cool
Yeah.
video.
I have his
Nice-
Shiloh book. I need to read that.
Nice way to enjoy dinner was as nerdy as it is. I watched dinner as I virtually
watched
visited
dinner?
a battlefield I've never been to.
I watched dinner.
I watched
We used to
dinner
do that
Yeah.
together, bro.
dinner as it went up.
Awesome. Yeah. Watched the
I
battle.
used to watch Josh's dinner.
Okay. Josh, speaking of, what are you reading, sir? I know
I
you
got
got
questions about that statement.
Do we
I
need to
don't
go
have it
back
on
to-
me. But
You know
yeah,
what,
well,
it's
I don't know. He might have been like, because we roomed together, so he might have been just staring at me the entire time, just like, and I was just oblivious because I didn't care.
There you go.
But no, I don't have it on me. But I'm reading. I forget the name, but it's 9/11 by Mitchell Zukov,
Okay.
and I read Tom McMillan's book on Flight 93, which is a good one. That's a good book on that.
Mm.
But the Mitchell Zukov book is very, very good for an overview of the entire day,
Mm.
because we're on 22 years now. It's about time to start realizing that that's becoming history versus memorialization. So, like, how do you educate versus memorialize?
Mm.
But I do have something cool in my hand. You guys see that?
Yeah, what is that?
I found it over
hockey
here.
puck.
No, it's not a hockey puck. Hockey puck is like that big.
Oh, yeah.
This is a piece of metal. I can't say who gave it to me or how they got it, but it is from, and it's not illegal, by the way. I just can't say how I got it.
Yeah.
It is from the counterweight of the Arlington Memorial Bridge. Yep,
No
it's a little
kidding.
piece of the counterweight of the Arlington Memorial Bridge when they did the renovation. This is the reason why it took so long.
No
Because
kidding.
when they cut into it to cut the counterweight apart, it was little teeny pieces of metal. They thought it was one big solid piece, but it was little teeny pebbles. Oh, they were pissed.
Yeah, I bet.
Very mad. And it took another year for them to clear that whole thing out. But I got a piece of it,
Very cool.
from a former individual whom I knew
Awesome.
with an agency I can't list.
Tim, you're reading something as well. What are you reading this week? And you always read something good.
Let's see. For nighttime reading, I'm reading this book called Extraordinary Circumstances by Brian K. Burton.
Okay.
At the 7 days. It's Hidden Passion. I like that. I also reread that one, Grant Invades Tennessee, the Tim Smith's book on Henry and Donaldson.
Okay.
I used it for my master's, but I wanted to read it, not graduate school reading. The two are completely different
Yes.
things.
The flipping through the pages reading.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's sort of how I digest a lot of books every now and again. So I love that reference.
I mean, I can say I read like 100 books for my master's on all things Grant, but I probably read 2 of them.
2 of them.
So basically, you're enjoying reading now.
Yes.
Good.
Basically, you're doing it for joy, not for the purpose of the paper.
Yeah, and I'm reading the 7 days one because there's so little written about it. I mean, I love Sears's work. I mean, if you're, there's no other work that I would refer to for
Right.
someone getting into the field pretty much about any battle. I would still, even though Scott Hartwick's book's going to become the book on Antietam, I'd still tell them to go to Landscape Turn Red first.
We will be reviewing that soon too, so keep that in eye on what Darren says. Now, Anthony, watch this space. Just a quick plug on that. We have had some conversations with the publisher, and we're going to be able to review that and have that out sooner than later. So if we're really, I've been dying to read this book. So I read To Antietam Creek a long time ago, and
personally, I prefer Carmen's book.
Well, absolutely. So, but I think there's a difference with the two. So, with Carmen's being one of the best treatments of Antietam, especially when it comes to the beginning and preliminary stages of the Maryland campaign, all the way up to Shepherdstown, as important as that is, I think having a 1-volume, 937-page book, that's how much is coming in, dude.
Holy
just on September 17th,
I mean,
of the Maryland campaign.
Better not ask me to help review it. It'll take me 10 years to get through it.
Nothing's going to beat Carmen for, I think, authoritativeness and accuracy, but it's not the book that you're going to tell someone, hey, go read Carmen. If they're trying to do it, you'll probably have the opposite effect.
Because it's not like that it's not good. It's the way Carmen's right. He's writing it as a
19th century writer.
Yeah, and that he's not also writing this book to really be a huge, wide public, readable series. It's actually kind of a government document.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's like the guidelines to help make the signage that you see today, all the Carmen signs and stuff. This is kind of the narrative behind that. Or as some people would know, something like a cultural landscape report, however those go out whenever you
the
see
same
those.
With the Chancellorsville study by Bigelow.
Yeah, it's more of a narrative. So it's not a cure to insomnia by any means. It could be for some, but it's also not the most floral when it comes to the writing style. So it's hard to digest for folks that don't have the same passion and interest level we would be going into that book with, But I agree with you. That's the thing. It's like Carmen. It's you by default. I'm sure Anthony does too. Just being Carmen's a very honorable New Jersey, not an honorary. An honorable.
Oh yeah. Like when I volunteered at Antietam, I would have said, "What's your interest level? Are you a military historian? Yes. Okay, Carmen. Are you not? Okay, Landscape Turned Red."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like Landscape Turned, but
I think that's a better way to sum it up.
This is going to take Sears' book.
Yeah. Don't read them damn signs because you'll get completely confused. Have fun. You want to go read that sign 420 yards in front of you that turn left by the left flank over into the undulating fire and fucking confusing.
Like on my first visit to the Chickamauga battlefield, I was told that it was possible to read and understand the battle by reading all of the War Department tablets in order. I'm thinking, yeah, you can, but I'm like, I don't know what the difference between the Winfrey Field and the Lee.
I'm with you.
Mill is. If I give me an idea, then I'll go out there and I'll read every damn tablet.
And that's where that's the debate between with Chickamauga between Cousins and Dave Powell. Right. Cousins is the equivalent of Landscape Turned Red. It's a very readable book. It isn't, it has its issues, but
sure.
It is a generally accurate depiction of Chickamauga. Right. Dave Powell's who you go to if you want to get into nitty gritty, written in a 20th, 21st century, style.
Right.
I guess I will.
What are you reading?
That's what I'm looking for. I had it over here somewhere. Oh, put it on the other side of me. There it is. I'm currently working on a book I have been waiting on for quite some time, and there's actually a fun story about how I was able to get this book in multiple ways. It's just a long story, but I'm excited about it.
You got it.
Yes, we finally have it. It's exciting. It's called The Military Memoirs of a Confederate Line Officer, Captain John C. Reed, Civil War from Manassas to Appomattox, and it is focusing on a man in the 8th Georgia Infantry who features very prominently at many of the battlefields that we all know very well. And I've been waiting to hear this because it's interesting to get a line officer's perspective on the war. That's something you don't always get to have a line officer's perspective. So that's sort of, in my mind, a new take at hearing someone's personal experience in the 8th Georgia of all regiments. That's a cool one. So I'm excited to see where that's going to go, man. It looks like it's a quick read. It's not too vast in its size. It's very small. So it should be a quick one, but one I'm going to take my time with because I want to just really digest everything that John C. Reed has to say. So very excited, and thank you, Sabbath Speedy, for publishing another banger. Very excited. Darren.
Now we
Yes.
jumped the pond.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
We
jump
have
on.
hop,
Come on.
skipped, and jump over to your land.
So-
What's going on?
Yeah, so there's obviously right slap bang in the middle of quite a few anniversaries at the moment, and will be as the week goes on as well. Lots of, especially in 1865. But one anniversary that has come along, and I had a book on that, is an event that happens at Dartmoor Prison in Devon, in England, and the book is called The Hated Cage. It's by a professor, and he's a professor of American history, but he's actually British, named Nicholas Guyot. And he's written this book. And so basically in 1812, in the War of 1812, a load of American sailors were marooned in Dartmoor prison. When you get to 1815, they're stuck there because the American government just forgets about them. The British government forgets about them, and they're literally, the war's finished and they're stuck there. And what happens is they kick off and they start rioting. So the prison guards can't handle what's going on. So they bring in the local militia. And when the local militia get inside the prison, they start shooting their rifles off. And they end up killing 9 people inside. Again, these poor guys have been stuck in there for years, you know. They're just marooned in there. There's no hope for them. And basically the book covers that. And it's such an interesting read. It really is. It has got a different cover in the US, but it's a good read. So I'll definitely recommend that. And again, I did do a podcast on that. So if you want to listen to Nicholas explain the story, then head over to my YouTube channel. But
our friend Nate Provost says, hey, everybody.
When I pulled the book out, it's been a long time since I've read it, since last year. And look what I found inside. Now, there's a funny story behind this, isn't there?
Nice.
I see those more often than I care to admit, by the way.
Now, I got given quite a few by a certain lady in a bookstore, didn't I? As a joke. She kept giving them. Do you want more? Do you want more?
Are you?
Huh?
To show you when you least expect it. Can you hear me?
Popping in and out.
Yeah, much better.
That just goes to show you that even when you least expect it, the United States is going to show up out of nowhere.
And I've got loads of them everywhere.
You know, like Ron Swanson says, history began July 4th, 1776.
And I just said, God damn you.
Well, Dartmoor prison. There's a... Oh, goodness. Don't share that comment.
No, it's fun.
I can't even see it.
Anthony sounded like he was going behind
in
the
actual
dark side
fact,
of the
Dartmoor prison is still actually in use today as a prison. Wow. Believe it or not, they have obviously a section, and again, so it was built. The reason it was built was for the Napoleonic Wars. So it's about 200 years old. The idea was it's going to be filled with French prisoners, you know. But obviously, by the time we get to the War of 1812, it's got no use. So they start chucking in these American sailors. But it is actually a prison today as well. There is a museum there, and I just haven't got there yet because Devon's about 5-hour drive away. So, you know, I will do it one day.
Okay.
I was just reading a Wikipedia entry while you were talking. Supposedly, my Irish history love just peaked when I read that Eamon de Valera was kept there in 1919. So,
no kidding.
That's interesting.
Not Michael Collins, though.
No.
So that I think that Darren, thank you for bringing that to our attention. As you said earlier before we were live, that there's actually 2 different covers. There's an American edition.
So there's an American one, and there's because it was 2 different publishers. So the British publisher was different to the American one, but it is available in the US because again, this guy's a historian in American history. He spent a lot of time in America over his career, teaching in various universities and this, that, and the other. But yeah, he's actually got his own. There's a few videos knocking about on YouTube where he actually does presentations on the actual event as well, which are quite good.
Very good. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think this is a great way to start leading into a big topic and a big anniversary we just went through. That would be the Battle of Shiloh.
I just say every time I get on here, I learn something from Darren. So thanks.
absolutely. Darren is incredible for that.
There you go.
Are you pointing?
You actually learned something for a
Yeah,
change.
we're all pointing at you. There you go. You get
My
pointed
arm
at now.
through the.
What if it actually went through? I'd be a little freaked
It went
out.
all the way
If
through.
your
If
arm-
it did, I'm going to look at it.
I'd be a little freaked out if that actually happened. Nathan shared some really cool information. This is awesome. My niece was born today. I have nicknamed her Shiloh. We're still
There you go.
there.
Happy birthday.
He's been planning that
Happy
for
birthday.
months.
Has he?
Yes.
That's awesome.
He must have had some inside information.
So this has been premeditated. Okay.
Inside information.
That it was going to be today.
And
Or
it
yesterday.
was.
Doubt.
Anyway, yeah. So Tim, I want to ask you a few questions about Shiloh.
Oh, cool.
So, firstly, is it a surprise? Because like they always make out that it's a big surprise. They don't know they're coming, and they get shocked, and they're in their tents, and you know what I mean, and things like that. But from what I've researched, it's not a surprise. They know they're coming. They know they're there. They know they're at Corinth. Yeah.
Okay, so
Also, Sherman as well. Is it his baddest day at the office?
these are some loaded questions, but I'll try to break it down as best I can. So, as far as the commanders would go, Sherman and Grant, namely, they would argue the rest of their days that they were not surprised, but then they would imply that they were surprised, but then they'd say they weren't surprised. So it's one of those things. The reality is yes, they were surprised that they were attacked there. However, when you get to that legend about soldiers being bayoneted in their tent, the early morning patrol to Fraley Field basically provided early warning. The Union troops were out of their camps. The line was established before the Confederates struck the ridge there at Shiloh Church and elsewhere. So it wasn't like you're watching Gods and Generals and them running through the camp of the 11th Corps. It was nothing like that.
Right.
They were established, and much of the fighting, the bloodiest fighting on the first day of the battle on April 6th, took place there on that ridge in front of the camps. So I think the Union Army, probably more than a surprise, suffered from the fact that despite, elements of the Army being in, having been in, combat at Forts Henry and Donelson, they were still mostly green. Prentice's division was entirely green. Most of Sherman's division was green. So really the only elements that you had that were veterans, albeit of one or two actions, were, elements of McClernand's division and some of W.H.L. Wallace's, which was previously led by C.F. Smith. Who was injured because he scraped his leg on jumping into a boat and died from it. Which was a big, got infected and everything, but it was a big blow to the Union, largely because he was so influential. He had been a superintendent at West Point, so he was very revered. Grant would actually say that he always had issues issuing orders to Smith because of that connection. Smith was always his superior. But circling back to the question, there's no doubt that the Union Army in general, namely the commanders, Grant was not, he had intimations that they could be attacked, but he really didn't think they would be. He certainly didn't expect an attack that Sunday, or wasn't planning on it. And then it gets into the why didn't they entrench and various reasons. And there's never going to be any agreement on it. And I tend to agree with what Nate said there. Sherman held his own. I think Sherman,
from what I understand, he didn't think that the gunfire and that going off was.
He was pissed. He thought it was a mark of indiscipline. He thought troops were just shooting willy-nilly for no reason. And he rides out there and finds out that he's attacked. But then after that, pretty much from that moment on, Sherman acquits himself very well.
He has a good day then, really.
And he comes out with his reputation enhanced. And despite the victory, which can be attributed to a number of things why this happened. Grant comes dangerously close to removal again after Shiloh. Some of that is warranted. He didn't entrench. He didn't, heed all the warnings. And to his credit, he learned very much from that. A lot of the lessons from Shiloh he tried to put in effect during his first attempt on Vicksburg. He tried to warn all the supply people when he heard about Van Dorn's raid that ended at Holly Springs, and it still didn't work out for him. So he had to string of bad luck. But he internalized those lessons, and unfortunately it did put him in something of a funk, as they call it. They say, I think Tim Smith was the one who wrote it, that he was basically in a post-Shiloh funk for the better part of the next 6 months. But yeah, he, in terms of Grant, though, he, like Sherman, once he showed up, he was everywhere.
Yeah.
A lot of that's coming from his own writing, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But I do believe he made it to rally at Pittsburgh Landing, then went to as many places on the field as he could go. So
nice background.
And also, I think a colonel deserves a shout out, and that is Everett Peabody, because he's the guy that actually engages the enemy first. Is that
he
right?
was the man,
Yeah,
and
that's who he's got over there, I think.
And more people need to learn about Everett Peabody, because without him, yep, Anthony, the Union Army wouldn't have had the warning that it did. The troops wouldn't have been formed up, and it very much then could have turned into a situation of soldiers being bayoneted in their tent. And at that point, I don't know that the Union Army could have held the Confederates from pushing them back away from Pittsburgh Landing. A lot of people forget what the Confederate objective was. It wasn't to actually push them into a river. It was actually the polar opposite. They were trying to swing, break the Union left, and then push them against the swamps of what was called Owl Creek, which basically marked the Union right flank. Very swampy terrain. It would also separate Grant, officially cut Grant off from Buell, because his Army of the Ohio is coming in. They've just actually started reaching Savannah, and Bull Nelson's divisions just across the river by later that morning. But if they'd been pushed away from the landing, they wouldn't have been able to get across there. The Confederates could have fortified the landing and prevented it. And we can, the Union Army can owe a lot of that to the, if you were talking Prentice, the impetuosity or the failure to obey orders of Everett Peabody, who, as it turns out, was right. So.
Very good. Does anybody have any other questions for him before we continue to move on with Shiloh and move into Shiloh? Not move on from Shiloh, but
anyway, sorry about bringing up the Sherman thing, because again, I'm going through some notes that I had from an old podcast, and he was everywhere, wasn't he? He literally was everywhere around the field.
Yeah, and he lost horses. He got shot in the hand.
Yeah, that's right. He got shot off his horse. Yeah, and Grant injures his leg, doesn't he, as well, at some point during Shiloh? Is that right? Before Shiloh or something like that. He falls off his horse at one point.
Yeah, I mean, these things run together, because after Vicksburg, he also falls off his horse, I think, in New Orleans.
Or maybe he was drunk. No, I'm only joking.
He was not drunk.
Josh is like, yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to read your quote really quickly?
Guys, have you got anything to add to Shiloh?
His drinking glass is kind of...
Well, I wish some of you would tell me the brandy of whiskey that Grant drinks. I would like to send a barrel of it to my other generals.
Great quote.
As I drink whiskey. For record, he drank Old Crow whiskey.
What about the loss of Albert Sidney Johnston? How big was that for the Confederacy to lose that? Anthony?
I was just going to say, considering it's Good Friday and also this anniversary of the second day of the Battle of Shiloh, we should also not forget about the guy who wrote Ben-Hur right here.
Yeah.
And that
I will say I will drink to both of those.
There you go.
And he did get lost on the way, though, didn't he, on the first day?
I don't believe that BS.
Okay, fair enough. Well, no, I mean, that's why we're having this discussion, isn't it? So, would you like to elaborate a bit
when
more?
I was working at a place that has something to do with the good general 2 years later, which happened as a result of his bad actions at the Battle of Shiloh. Lew Wallace was just following orders and what he understood Grant's orders to be. And then Lew Wallace gets a bad rap, but unpopular opinion, but does more in one day 2 years later than Ulysses S. Grant did in 4 years.
But also, you got to give them a bit of slack because they don't have a sat nav, do they?
Right.
They don't really know where they are, do they? Let's be honest. So
what are you talking about? Did more than Ulysses Grant?
I said that on
he saved the Union and from being invaded. Ulysses Grant was fighting Lee directly head on.
Yeah.
Okay, but
he saved DC from being invaded, but which is admirable. But it's no.
But
Get out of here.
But if we're gonna give Grant a lot of credit later on, he had 6 weeks of diddly squat.
That's true.
We have a question down here by Readout Productions that I have to dip out in a bit, but first, is it wiser to sum up the hornet's nest as a needless sacrifice rather than the noble sacrifice Prentice would have you believe?
He beat me to the question. I was going to ask about the hornet's nest. But
I don't think so. I'm very much in line with Tim Smith's way of thinking on the hornet's nest. It was important. He's kind of getting a bad rap now for slamming the hornet's nest is unimportant, but the reality is very few of the Confederate burial trenches were located in the hornet's nest area. But the problem with it is it's really so most of the troops in the hornet's nest are from C.F. Smith's division under the command then of William H.L. Wallace. A lot of Iowans, Illinoisans. The problem is that Wallace is mortally wounded and Prentice survives, albeit captured. So when the war ends, Prentice is there of the two commanders whose divisions were there to tell his story. In addition, the first superintendent of Shiloh was a veteran of, I think, the 15th Iowa, part of Prentice's division. There. The Confederates certainly launched numerous attacks against it. That's indisputable, but they weren't the costly attacks that legend made out. There were more casualties to the west in Sherman and McClernand's area along Shiloh, Church Ridge, Shiloh Branch, and further back as they would draw. And then for so long, no one even talked about the fact that those two divisions, Sherman and McClernand, launched a counterattack on the 5th or on the 6th and pushed the Confederates back to what's called the review field, I think. Of course, they then counterattacked again and drove Sherman back. But it was important, and I don't think it was a needless sacrifice, and in large part because Grant did certainly order all of his division commanders to hold at all hazards, which is very common, so you can't really slam Grant for saying it. Ordered in situations like that. The problem is Sherman, McClernand, Hurlbut did not take it 100% literally. They thought when they were flanked out of their position that was hazard enough. Wallace and Prentice took it as in to the death. And ultimately, they're nearly 100 completely surrounded and with just a narrow gap that some troops escape out of, but not many.
And in the details.
That's right. The reason I say this is it seems there should be no reason Wallace and Prentice remained in the Hornet's Nest past 4 p.m. Everyone else was well in the process of fortifying Pittsburgh Landing.
Yeah, I think the legend would have you believe that Grant desired that. I think that it was up to commander's discretion, but they no one came to go get them and pull them out, and that could very well be a ding on Grant. Maybe, I don't know. He didn't talk about it. He wasn't, as far as I know, he wasn't expecting them to pull out when they got flanked either. So it certainly cost him. I mean, on the other hand, much of Prentice's division survived because he had about, what was it, 5,500 at the start of the day, and they now assess that he had less than 1,000 in the Hornets' Nest line. Most of his division was at the cliffs at Pittsburgh Landing, or at the bluffs at Pittsburgh Landing, so they would partake in the next day's action. I'm not sure on the numbers on Wallace's division. Not all of his division was there in the Hornets' Nest, so more of his escaped. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting to know. Anthony has something.
Beauregard?
Beauregard.
Yeah. Two times within 9 months, this guy is stuck being second fiddle to a Johnston. And, he does, I think, a better job under Johnston number 2 than
Johnston number 1, yeah.
I mean, yes, he's handed a pretty bad. I mean, he gets overshadowed at first Manassas by a guy who's not even in command of the Confederate Army, right? Stonewall Jackson. And he's facing a pretty bad Union commander. And at any point where he's actually doing something, the Confederates are on the offensive. 9 months later, he's got to take now a dead man's strategy. And I mean, what is Grant says at night to Sherman on the night of the 6th? Lick him tomorrow.
We'll lick him tomorrow.
So it's already looking bad for Beauregard to try to even get anything out of it other than just, okay, let's just he's better off just get the hell out of there, right? So playing second fiddle to a Johnston is not good for this man.
Pierre Gustav Beauregard.
I mean, what are y'all's opinion? I mean,
also the Union Army are backed up by 3 ships as well, aren't they?
So they actually have reinforcements coming on the ship.
Is it the Tyler, the Lexington,
and the other one?
I can't remember the other one's name, but they've got some big guns on their gunboats. So they've got that back up too, haven't they?
I think Beauregard, if I'm not mistaken, the plan was his. So he planned it. And the big knock on Beauregard is that right before the attack, he lost his nerve. And he was a big advocate for calling it off, going back to Corinth, not wanting to do it. And that you've got to believe that if your heart's not in it, what impact is that going to have? I mean, he rejoices at the end of April 6th saying we've won this massive victory and sends that off to Richmond. Davis goes with it initially, even though he started hearing rumors that may not be accurate. Come April 7th, I think he did about as well as he could have done under circumstances. The Union counterattack was full-throated. I mean, his troops weren't in the best position to start off that day. They probably should have pulled back a little bit further to a better position. So I do question the extent to which he planned on renewing the attack. And if he wasn't going to renew the attack, maybe that's the waste, is that he should have just
got out of there,
cut out that night of April 6th. And at least then, I mean, believe it or not, Edward Cunningham, who wrote probably in his dissertation that was then published, Shiloh and the Western Campaign of 1962, he calls it a stalemate, Shiloh. I mean, it's a great book, but that's one area where I disagree with him. I mean, Shiloh was a Union victory because they held their position and they swept the field. You can't really, just because they lost a day, they won the other day. I mean, if that's the case, then is Gettysburg because the Confederates won 2 days out of 3, arguably. And I know someone will fight me on that, but
that's interesting to consider, though.
Also, on the 7th, I'll bring up something interesting as well. Grant had a near miss. Grant nearly got shot. One of the bullets actually hit his scabbard on his sword, and one of his colonel's horses was shot and killed, where he was getting too close to the fighting.
Interesting. I did not know that happened either. See, that's the thing. I don't know a lot about much of anything at all. I have the books to read at some point. Maybe I should have prepped to do with this anniversary. I'm learning a lot from you guys, and it's kind of reading.
It was
Tim, obviously, we know it's an important victory for Grant and that, but how important was it viewed at the time? This victory at Shiloh.
There was relief in the great, in the north. They were okay. So Shiloh doesn't really fit neatly into there is no Shiloh campaign. It's basically part of what would be called, the Corinth campaign, I guess. You could, in that sense, view it as a strategic Confederate counterattack. It doesn't work out well for Grant. He wins the battle, and it almost ends his career. In a sense, it's probably more significant for weakening what was then known as the Army of the Mississippi. So Confederate Army defending Corinth. They suffer tremendous casualties, and it weakens them. Halleck, though, when he shows up and takes command, superseding Grant and Buell, makes Grant his second in command, actually puts George Thomas in command of Grant's forces. He drives on Corinth so slowly that ultimately Confederates abandon it without a fight, really, in the first Battle of Corinth.
So quicker action. It could have probably, destroyed that part of the army quicker if they had been a bit quicker moving on.
I think that Grant does not aggressively pursue. That's a fact. He doesn't. I don't think he gets gun shy, but I think that's probably the best evidence of his surprise is that, and at that time, people lose sight of this. Shiloh was the bloodiest and largest battle in the history of the continent up to that point.
Yeah.
It takes, 2 months later, it is superseded in a way by Gaines's Mill, but it is incredibly horrific. That's the first time, Grant utters words, that you hear on other battlefields at Antietam and elsewhere, that you could go from one part of the field to another without setting foot on the ground due to the bodies. No one's ever seen anything like that. And keep in mind, and I really do sympathize with these commanders. Grant had been a newly promoted captain when he got out of the army, and now he's leading an army of 7, 8 years later, he's leading an army of 50,000 guys. Most guys before that had never been higher than a regimental command. And those are, if you were a regimental commander in the old army, you were like 50, 60 years old. Nobody had experience doing any of this. And you're still dealing with two armies that are mostly green. The Confederate army is entirely green.
Good evening, Nate.
Yeah, Nate has popped on to join the conversation about Shiloh. I'd love to have you teach me something because I have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. So hearing it from you guys is great. This is an educational experience for everybody, I think. And
so Nate, what's your view on Shiloh and Grant?
My view has already been said by Tim. I don't really need to add much there.
There you
go. No, I mean, my only thing about Shiloh is, and I'll only kind of, I'll just add what I've been reading about Johnson and Jeff Davis and his generals in the West. It's by Stephen Woodworth, and it's about the various Confederate generals out in the Western Theater of War. He goes into quite a bit of depth about Albert Sidney Johnson, and really what's kind of interesting about Albert Cindy Johnson is the fact that even though I feel like the legend has him being propped up, and if he had lived, they would have won the battle. And that may not necessarily be the case. However, because there were so few competent Confederate generals in the Western theater of the war, it really was tragic, at least for the Confederacy, that to lose a guy like Albert Sidney Johnson, since you're dealing with very political Confederate generals like Bragg, and then you're just dealing with straight up incompetence like Leonidas Pope.
Or like Bragg.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I want to add.
Nobody likes Bragg, did they?
No.
So, and then of course, you have Beauregard, and Beauregard isn't the most incompetent general either. He has his good traits as a general, but ultimately things just go awry. I think
what would it have been like for him though? The next day, obviously Johnson gets killed, and then it's literally his battle now, isn't it? So I can't imagine what he must be thinking just all of a sudden. But again, you said that it was his plan anyway, Tim. So
yeah, and the best account of that comes from his volunteer aide, Governor Isham Harris of Tennessee. He's pretty much joined at the hip to Johnson. He takes great offense because it seems like Beauregard doesn't bat an eye at the loss of Johnson. So he thinks he comes off as callous. As far as Johnson goes, also forgotten this fact that Johnson was under a pretty big cloud going into Shiloh. And part of this goes, I know I come across as a Grant fan, but one of the people underplay the significance of Fort Donelson and what that actually did. So whether it was his idea or he came up with it with Halleck or what have you, when he took Donelson, he unhinged that entire Kentucky line of Johnsons that stretched from Columbus, Kentucky through Bowling Green, forcing Johnson to fall back. And he felt like he couldn't hold Nashville with Grant and with Buell coming down and Grant coming from Dover. So he had to go to the next best place. He initially went to Chattanooga and then elected to move to Corinth. So he gave up this Confederate heartland, incredibly rich soil, good chunk of their population. It basically dooms Memphis. Loses the first Confederate state capital to fall at Nashville. And who do they blame for it? They blame Albert Sidney Johnston. So he's trying to redeem himself. And is that may be why he basically plays the tactical commander role. He's like an ad hoc fire brigade moving from here to there, trying to keep that plan of driving the Hurlbut's division away from Pittsburgh Landing, away from the river. That's where he's at the entire morning until he's wounded.
So do you think the idea of Johnson taking the fight to them at Pittsburgh Landing is because of that situation of that cloud hanging over him? He wants to prove himself in a way.
I think that certainly had to have been part of it. Part of it is common sense, as Tim Smith said in his great video today. It doesn't take you don't need a PhD or to have even really served to come to the conclusion that you would rather fight one army rather than two.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows that, Confederates have scouts. It's still their state, even if most of it's fallen. They know Buell's coming down, and he has a limited window. The reality is, the big question of Shiloh is what would have happened if they'd attacked 2 days earlier like they planned. Would Grant have still won? There are some who say yes.
And again, like you just said, the next day there's more that you've got Buell's army as well, haven't you? So
but you also have that fresh division of Lew Wallace coming down.
So they haven't really got a chance. Well, they have, but it's just a bigger, amount of people that are going to have to face the following day, isn't it?
Yeah, and it makes it. I think what Buell's forces do, and they fought hard on April 7th. I'm not saying that they didn't or anything, But they really put the question beyond doubt. I mean, with the arrival of those 3 divisions plus Lew Wallace, so 4 fresh divisions, the Confederates really had no chance. The numbers were relatively equal the day before, if not slightly favoring the Confederates, but it's overwhelming. And coming from that terrain, the Union Army is attacking essentially downhill.
And I know you said earlier about the green troops in the Union Army, but the Confederates had quite a few green troops as well, didn't they?
They were entirely green. Any veterans in the Western Theater at that point were sitting in Union prison camps up north from Fort Donelson. I mean, I guess you could say the only veterans they would have been forced cavalry. But Shiloh is almost an entirely wooded battlefield. I mean, most Civil War battlefields were, but Shiloh really, it was all woods with isolated clearings.
Yeah, it's definitely on my bucket list, that's for sure.
I, for one, want to warn Anthony that there's a guy over his shoulder whispering sweet nothings into his ear.
Well, you talk
about there's some dude creeping over you.
Well, talking about overlooked Confederate commanders and some of the, I mean, I don't know if this is unpopular or a popular opinion, but one of the best standouts of the Battle of Shiloh is, in my opinion, that guy. Any guesses?
Isn't that
I know that picture, but I forget his name.
The Vice President of the United States,
Breckinridge.
Breckinridge.
Yeah, that was okay. John Cabell.
The
other one I put up before him.
Orphan Brigade.
The other one I put up before the Vice President is hands down a lot better than him, but you can't overlook what Breckinridge did. I mean, he covers the retreat of the Confederate Army from Shiloh, and then there he is. I don't know. I just wanted to give a shout out to one of my favorite overlooked commanders of the war.
And out west, he looks great. I mean, with him standing next to Polk and Hardy, he looks pretty good.
He doesn't look good in this photo.
Yeah, he looks pretty ugly.
Jeez.
Did you have Claiborne up?
I saw Claiborne too. I was like, oh, it's Patty.
Yep. He does a good job on the German bloke, doesn't he?
I'd have to say Claiborne is one of the few Civil War generals who I would argue was exceptional in virtually every engagement he fought. He never seemed to have a bad day. I mean, you can't really call Franklin a bad day because every person on this earth in his position would have had the exact same day he had.
Yeah.
But where he had the ability to influence the situation, he was exceptional. From Shiloh leading a regiment to through
he saves Bragg's ass at Missionary Ridge.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's not for him, that may have been decisive in the sense that the entire army could have truly been bottled up and
yeah.
Well,
and that's something to really consider, regardless of the battle out west. Is the Army of Tennessee, all these various Confederate officers. It's the same problem that the Union Army is facing in the Eastern Theater of the war. It's all this politicking that's going on with these Confederate generals, and there's all this kind of backstabbing. There's the issue with Bragg and his subordinates. Polk just thinks he's the greatest thing since, I don't know, like Alexander the Great. I mean, I didn't say sliced bread since it didn't exist yet. So, but ultimately, all of these Confederate generals, that's why Davis is having such a hard time in the Western Theater of the war. You do not have a coherent leader that is not also trying to politic his way into getting the highest rank out west. I mean, they're trying to get rid of Bragg, Pemberton. They don't really trust Pemberton. It's just all this really weird stuff. And you see actually a lot of the subordinate officers much more competent. I mean, even guys like Nathan Bedford Forrest, who has no military background, even though he's, I wouldn't call him like a really great general. He at least is good at rating.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of him, but yeah.
Yeah, right.
Full pillow.
So I think ultimately it really comes down to, Johnson is facing and Beauregard is facing all these different political components or parts. And then also, and quite frankly, I mean, they're facing Grant at Shiloh. So they have a lot, the cards are stacked against them. And I think that's probably their biggest issue at Shiloh. And quite frankly, in most of the battles out west, it's a lot of land to cover. Davis could really care less about the Western theater of war. There's just a lot of problems.
Quick question about the West in general. Why has it been so overlooked for so long?
Because it's not Gettysburg.
That's true.
No, that's a really good
You just said it, didn't you? But it's annoying, isn't it? Because a lot of the Civil War happens in the West, and it just gets completely overlooked.
It's not Antietam, and it's not Gettysburg.
The Eastern Theater is mass murder for 4 years. The Western Theater is where the war is won.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and
they cut the Confederacy in half.
Yeah.
The Union Army or Union leadership acknowledged that at the time, that the war was essentially won out west. I mean, Sherman knew it, trying to convince Grant when he became general in chief to stay out west and not get bogged down in Washington. I mean, it was the proximity to Washington that made, Gettysburg overshadow Vicksburg, even though anyone knows, Gary Edelman went on a video and said, 5 times he was like, Vicksburg's more important than Gettysburg. Vicksburg's more important than Gettysburg. And you'd never expect that just based on, what you hear. But he believes that, and you just look at a map and you can see what Vicksburg did. But it's more than Vicksburg, the Army of the Cumberland's efforts in the Chattanooga corridor.
Also Stones River. Stones River was won at a time when the Union armies were really struggling. I mean, even Grant was struggling down around Vicksburg. So,
and then like Curtis in Arkansas winning Pea Ridge and the effort, Prairie Grove. Talk about an overlooked battle, Prairie Grove.
And again, the Trans-Mississippi gets completely overlooked.
And one of the best movies, the best Disney movie of all time comes out of the Western Theater.
Johnny Shiloh?
Fess Parker. Great locomotive chase.
Yeah.
Well, never seen that. I'll have to go and watch it.
Great movie.
I also think the Eastern Theater kind of overshadows the Western Theater because it's so compact. Like there's so many major battles within like
100 miles,
30 miles, 100 miles. Mississippi is like, oh, that's 1,000 miles.
Do you think it's to do with the press as
and
well?
You look at the map throughout the entire war, right? It's like, and nothing's happening in the Eastern Theater, but there's really a lot happening because it's over 10, 15 miles.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it's the way it's publicized. So in the East, obviously, they're just churning out stuff about the East. About the West.
That's brag.
Bro, you scared the shit out of me.
So, Darren, going back to that question.
That scared the hell out of me.
That's actually exactly what Gary Gallagher would argue, Darren. So So Gary Gallagher actually made the argument. He said it's the Eastern Theater that matters because that's what the press cared about. I think there's a lot of, I might disagree with that interpretation, but that argument is definitely there. And it's quite frankly, it's very valid. However, I think ultimately it might come down to also maybe some of the mythology that surrounds some of those places and what's
could have fooled Grant.
That's definitive because it ties to Lee's legacy with the Lost Cause. What battles did he win? They're on the Eastern Theater.
Yeah.
Oh, he's the great mythological angel of the Confederacy. Yeah. Let's look at him. And Chancellorsville and
but don't go to West Virginia
and Fredericksburg, and don't go to West Virginia. Don't go to Rich Mountain. Yeah.
And who was out west? Who was out west?
The Confederates were losing.
The Republican who looked bad after the war.
Pope.
Longstreet.
Longstreet.
Longstreet's
Oh
right.
yeah, that's right.
He could not command an
That's-
army, could he? He was
But
terrible.
That's a good point to bring up. They
Longstreet-
probably said, "Forget about the Western Theater. We lost out there. Let's remember all the battles that we won on the Eastern Theater that involved Lee." Oh, except for that.
He won. He
That's
won.
even worse.
He was not in the West.
except
Is that when he
for
lost his first
Appomattox.
arm or his
Yeah.
leg?
Are you making all these or are these?
No, I have a bunch. When we name generals, I'm just gonna throw them up from now on.
Well, he was not in the West. Well, he was in the West, but he wasn't. Hood was the
Longstreet.
character.
Longstreet did not. He actually really struggled. I mean, I know he gets a lot of. He gets a
was an
lot
army commander, was he?
of
He does.
praise
Now, okay.
for.
Halleck has a lot to do with Shiloh too, right? Does Halleck play a part yet, or is
Yeah,
that maybe
because
later on?
he tells Grant basically. he tells
Sorry,
Grant.
keep going.
He tells Grant to not do anything until Buell gets there and he's coming down.
Please.
So Grant, his hands are kind of tied in a sense, so you kind of got to sympathize there. That's a good one.
Yeah, I love that.
But he and then he takes over, and really I like to slam his offensive on Corinth. It was pretty awful.
But he
Oh.
went by the book. He went by Jomini's teachings. How could it be wrong?
I'm gonna
Charles just said it on that
Yeah,
comment.
he did. I like this comment.
What
Better
other,
victories were in the East, not in the West.
what other
And here's the thing: talk about Chickamauga for a second. You can attribute many of their victories in the East to some semblance of skill. The only reason they win Chickamauga is 100% luck, and it didn't
Yep.
have to do with him.
Yeah, he had bad luck at Chickamauga
Yeah,
and in the Army of the Potomac too.
do you have Rosecrans?
I don't know. If
Can I bring up another thing as well?
Yeah,
This
sure.
is where, and I mean, point. If I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. So there was a guy for the Cincinnati Gazette that actually started off the rumors of Grant being drunk at the Battle of Shiloh, and that got printed.
Yeah,
And that's where
so
one of the rumors starts from.
So it could have fooled Grant that the East didn't, the media didn't pay attention to the West because he was under a media storm. They certainly weren't focusing on his great book. They weren't focusing on his resilience. Is embodied by the greatest single quote in the Civil War. Lick 'em tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you all you needed to know about Grant and where he was headed. And it is far and away, I think, the most awesome quote
Yeah, definitely.
or exchange during the war.
It needs to be put on a T-shirt.
It needs to be a T-shirt. I want that painting.
I want it.
That's a good one.
I'm going to wear that T-shirt when I go to Shiloh.
Just
Heck yeah.
Stand
go
up.
forward.
Is that tree actually still there? Do you know?
No, it's gone. It got destroyed in a hurricane, I think, in
Oh, damn it.
1909.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Yeah,
We're talking about all these guys that have to show their faces. We
We
talked
need to
about
I don't know. Braxton Bragg's one scared the shit out of me earlier.
Bring
I
that
was
one
literally.
back Bring the Beauregard one back up because he looks a bit like Stephen Lang.
The realest, the one that looks the most real is the Henry Halleck one.
Yeah. He looks like
hate
he's just
that.
about to butt fuck Grant, doesn't he?
Oh my god!
How about this book?
I wasn't expecting.
Bottom of Glory.
Yeah.
Is that what he did? Is that the grin he did when he lost the orders 3 times to the pontoons?
Oh my-
I mean, nothing but Victory is one of my favorite books that I've ever read.
That actually-
So,
Straight out of left field.
That's on the list.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen,
No,
if you
it's
heard any
not-
bad
no.
language during this.
It's the unfiltered historian. I think
podcast.
the amount of time we've been doing this, I think they
fuck.
expect that now. Oh my god! Thank you, Darren. This chap,
that little
very,
chap.
yeah, this guy, Little Phil.
Okay, while we've
Little
got
Phil.
the opportunity,
Yeah.
come on. What's so great about Sheridan?
Thank you.
Okay.
Let's segue into that. I like that. I have 2 people here.
Come on, Nate.
Not in
Give
my
us-
Hey,
give us some love for Sheridan.
No, I'll
Let's
wait. I'll
talk
wait
about
till all the
Little Phil.
comments are done.
no, hey, it's to you because
Me and Tim have had this talk. I've actually never really sat down and because I know you and I are not in the same camp when it comes to Sheridan. like complete
Yeah,
opposite ends, and
so
that's
here's
okay.
the
I love
thing.
that. I would love to hear it.
Sure. Here's the thing about Sheridan. Do I think he's a jerk? Absolutely. Do I think the guy is somewhat narcissistic? Yes. Do I think he was overbearing and annoying? All of those personality traits that just annoy you? Yes, he probably was all of those.
I mean, look at that, man.
However, that said,
sad.
his actions say differently. And by the way, Ethan Rafuse, who actually teaches, well, he did teach at the Staff College in Fort Leavenworth. Now he actually teaches at the what's that in Carlisle, Pennsylvania?
Army War College.
Yes,
Army War College.
The Army War College there. He wrote a really, really wonderful essay, and I recommend that you read it if you have the chance. But it's actually about Sheridan as an administrator. So I want to pull back Sheridan to the very, very beginning of the war.
Okay.
He is under the direction of Halleck. Okay. But here's the thing though. He actually worked in the Trans-Mississippi Theater. And the one thing you need to know about the Trans-Mississippi Theater in 1861, it was really corrupt. It was inefficient. It didn't work. The Union Army had a problem with taking items that they might not have been allowed to take. Sheridan was one of the best auditors that there ever was, and that's not exciting by itself.
No, but it's important. It's kind of like the McClellan's better at an organization.
He was also the quartermaster for Curtis, right?
And that's something, yeah, and that's huge, by the way. So the fact that he's able to do that, the fact that he can reorganize basically reorganize the Union Army in the Trans-Mississippi at the time, that was really impressive. And then he comes west and actually does fight in a cavalry action, and he wins. It's a small battle, but
can I just ask you a question, Nate? So he is an infantry officer at first, isn't he?
He is, and
so how does he make that transition to cavalry?
All the time. And that's something else to take note of is even in Wittenberg's reassessment of Sheridan, he does admit that Sheridan was really good.
He does. You're talking about Little Phil, right?
And he's really, I mean, look, the guys, I understand like Sheridan made mistakes. I totally acknowledge that. I get that. And right at 3rd Winchester, I know that he funneled in units in a way that almost somewhat led to disaster, but nonetheless, it's still carried out, and he still put forth orders that are recorded, and he fixed the problem. He just adapted to the situation and overcame it.
He also had to incorporate elements of 3 different armies that were districts basically into one cohesive force, which is very difficult to do.
Well, he didn't like George Meade, though, did he?
Right.
Well, mind you, George Meade was hard work anyway, wasn't he?
He was. And I actually like Charles's comment there, because the one thing that he gets at, and Tim brought this up as well, Sheridan was a quartermaster. Grant, Sherman, and Sheridan were all quartermasters.
Yeah.
And that's really, really important to understand.
I've just burnt Atlanta down.
Yeah.
We mentioned
Georgia. There's a restaurant there called Sherman's Barbecue, I think. So,
you just had loads of people in the South send you death threats now.
Yeah, probably.
Well, there's a bar in DC called McClellan's Retreat as well.
Hey, that sounds like a wonderful, relaxing place.
The Sherman's Barbecue joint is pop. Hey.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I just fuck Lincoln.
John Pope. John Pope.
I can make him.
So I think my point is that Sheridan was a decent tactical commander. Operationally, he did very, very well. Logistically, he was probably at his best. Just like Grant, just like Sherman. Logistics was his thing.
Okay.
What always made me laugh about most of the generals, they was all what they called I can't remember now. Sorry, I've lost it. So West Point is a thingy school. It's not a military school, is it? It's
engineering.
Engineering, yeah, they're all engineers. There you go. And Halleck and that are just behind him. And Rainer putting the knife in. There he is, that little cheeky little bastard. Look.
I know.
Do you have Burnside?
Yes, actually, I do. But and I've always I think at face value, I take Sheridan as just a dick, and that's kind of the thing I've always said. It's like I'm not saying as a general he is the worst thing since whatever. I don't say that he's an awful general, but I do look at really critically.
He's a jerk. He's a jerk.
And it comes out in his performance on a battlefield at one point. I think that's where I have my biggest problem. And now talk about Joe Hooker. Joe Hooker is the same thing. Joe Hooker is a pompous ass. We know that. But I love Joe. I actually am a huge fan of Joseph Hooker. Yeah, he was.
Fighting Joe.
Yeah, and Joe Hooker was fantastic as a general. I think with the confidence
as a corps
loss,
commander,
even better. Yeah. But I do think he deserves a lot of credit, and he doesn't get a lot of credit because
he gave us the word
Meade. I throw this argument, and Tim, you've heard me say this plenty of times when it comes to Hooker. I've said that Meade won the Battle of Gettysburg with Hooker. Damn it, Darren.
He did, did he?
Yeah, he did. Hooker had an army organized and equipped to win the Battle of Gettysburg. Meade was the man that led that. So if we think about it,
if you're going to make
Shiloh, we're supposed to be talking Shiloh, and then you bring Gettysburg back.
I know. I'm not trying to talk about Gettysburg. I'm just saying. But that's
how the hell?
Yeah. Sorry. Just my quick plug for Hooker because we got to that a little bit.
Well, you can't. If you're talking about Sheridan too, you can't forget Cedar Creek.
By that logic, Tyler.
Yeah.
If you're saying Meade was given an army by Hooker, then you can. McClellan didn't create a damn thing in his life.
No, it got dismantled by Burnside.
No, Irvin McDowell gave him.
Okay, so we could say that too. I mean, McDowell, great.
And then who gave him the reinforcements he needed later on?
McDowell just gave him watermelon rinds. What are you talking about?
Oh my God!
I'm sorry. I just wanted to defend my man a little bit.
No, that's I have a kind of a special place in my heart for McClellan. I think
so do I see him every day.
He's a short man. He's misunderstood.
McClellan or McDowell?
Short people, isn't it? Yeah. It's called little man syndrome.
Phil Sheridan.
Yeah, that's right, Little Phil. But
did he need a stall to get on his horse? Do we know?
Lincoln said a funny quote about him. About him being his arms so long that he could reach down and scratch his ankles without bending over. That was a great quote. I love that.
Say something else.
Okay. Can I ask a question of the group?
Absolutely, please.
Okay.
This is fun.
Of course, knowing that Gettysburg was not the turning point and most important battle of the war.
Thank you.
How do you rate Shiloh's importance?
To
North and South?
I think it's a precedent setter. I would absolutely say that. I don't know how, and I can't divulge into how tactically and operationally this would look in the long scheme of this entire war. But if I was to comment on, again, face value of this battle, I would think that the numbers and the way this was fought and kind of the ferociousness of the fighting there absolutely set a precedent to the battles that were coming. This was the first one that really had the numbers. There's the newspaper article right there. I mean, this is it says it itself. It was the bloodiest fight up until that point. So is it a culture shock to the nation? Sure. Maybe not so much as First Manassas, where that was really, and again, First Manassas is really just this war is going to be a lot longer than we thought. And then maybe we should figure out how to fight it.
Shiloh more so. I mean, Grant went into Shiloh thinking that it was going to be one more big fight and then over. And Shiloh disabused him of that idea. That being said, I mean, a bigger turning point would be Fort Donelson because it started that movement that never stopped.
Right.
Okay, that's a good look at it too.
Point, And Shiloh,
an important aspect. I'm sorry.
And Shiloh could have been that thing to stop it if they'd been able to destroy Grant's army, but the fact that they didn't just kept that momentum.
So
I think an important aspect of something we touched on earlier was that Grant was this close to losing it, and he almost, even though he won the battle, almost lost his job. If he loses that battle, there's no Grant.
That's right.
We don't know hypothetically what's going to happen, but yeah, he's pretty important.
that's Grant's facial reaction.
Yeah,
he's like,
he's pretty important. I mean, he's the one who captures Vicksburg.
That's why I actually
we don't know what hypothetically is going to happen after that, but it's important for his career to that second day to lick them that day, literally.
Mhm.
It came out
But
funny.
also, he's
But,
the one that goes and saves Chattanooga as well, and then
Mhm.
opens the way down to Georgia. You know, that's it, isn't it? That's
Well,
Georgia,
there are people who say
Well, George Thomas did it.
Thomas
yeah.
did, or Rosecrans was going to do it anyway.
Rosie.
You know,
but still, if he loses that battle, he's not involved in any of those conversations.
right, exactly.
And
That's true.
let's see if Tyler does it again.
So,
Thanks to Grant, we get George Thomas.
Oh,
The Virginians turned against
Um,
the South.
so I'll
he said
just
both of them.
add one thing to this. I can't tell you how important Shiloh is compared to other campaigns or battles. However, I can tell you there's a really good there's a professor at the Staff College in Leavenworth. His name is Harry Laver, and he actually wrote The Leadership of Ulysses S. Grant, which is a very underrated book.
Is that Oxford University that publishes that one?
It's Kent State. This is Kent
Okay.
State. Okay. So, and it's very short, but he doesn't spend much time on Shiloh. But he says that Shiloh is the turning point of the war. He believes that Grant that night, and this is going back to the previous comment here, when Grant said we're looking tomorrow, that changed the entire outlook of the war. He's looking at it from a perspective of, you know,
I'm sorry.
he's looking at a perspective from the development of
those
Grant in
so
general.
loud.
But nonetheless, he thinks that you know, it was the turning point, and he's given multiple talks about it.
Mm.
I see your point. You know, that's the point where Grant sort of grows up.
Yeah, and that's kind of why too. I mean, think about the Grant series that came out on the History Channel. I mean, what they were advertising was the Battle of Shiloh. I mean,
oh yeah, they were.
That's it.
Like that.
That's the
That
moment.
was it.
Yeah,
I think they did a really good job covering the Shiloh
they did.
because they focused on that pretty heavily. I mean, even over some of the Overland campaign stuff, which I was really happy to see how well represented the Overland campaign was. I don't think it delivered on as much of a significance as that should have been in that show. It got a little less, but you're right. I think Grant really does kind of get a start at Shiloh. It really does make kind of his presence known, even though the accusations fly off the handle from there. I mean, they really
because Halleck is scared.
Yes, yeah. Look at that man. He's always scared.
So happy in the photo.
I hate him more than I hate Sheridan.
Well,
actually, like if I had to pick between the two,
I've
Sheridan
just got
would
a little
be.
bit of a what if. What if Halleck isn't moved to Washington? Does Grant continue in his role? Because obviously we know that he doesn't like Grant and he doesn't want him to.
Grant is back in command of the Army of the Tennessee before Halleck gets called east.
Mm-hmm.
Halleck had gone back to St. Louis. I don't think he would have been able to be as aggressive in his early drives on Vicksburg as he was. He needed that, but at the end of the day, Halleck turned into a net positive for Grant. You know, he shielded him a lot during Vicksburg. People were chomping at the bit. Sometimes it seemed like Halleck was too, but he covered him. And then he took care of a lot of the political aspects of the general-in-chief job once Grant took over. That Grant either didn't understand, who you could, when his instinct was to relieve Banks before the Red River expedition.
Mm-hmm.
And basically Halleck had to politely tell him, you really can't, you can do whatever you want, but you really can't do that for political reasons. And, providing resources, for as much as he dorked over Burnside at Fredericksburg, he gets those resources that the Army of Potomac needs during the Overland campaign and helps orchestrate that from a chief of staff standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And
good at his desk.
And he was, he's kind of, hate to say it, from April 1964 through the end of the war, he's kind of one of the unsung heroes of the North in a way. He was in a role that finally suited him.
Yeah.
And Tim, real quick here. It's unrelated to it, but I have a question for you that I don't think I've actually ever discussed with you, which is kind of
Oh
surprising.
God.
Oh God.
But what is your interpretation of the controversy with Lew Wallace at Shiloh?
Okay.
Keep going. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My interpretation of Lew Wallace.
I will.
So I think he was trying. Do I think he got lost? I think he did get a little turned around, but I don't blame him for that. I understand at the same time why Grant was upset. The reality is that he ended up on Grant's list, and Grant was not a forgiving person.
No.
Even after Monocacy, like Grant praised Wallace after Monocacy, but he never went so far. It was kind of like, oh, this guy really is worth something. He never went back and said that he was always a good guy. So he never would apologize. But Lew Wallace really is about the only person I can think of that ever gets off Grant's list once he's on
the shit list.
It's, but if you look at the movement from Crump's Landing to Pittsburgh, Grant wants him on the left. He clearly doesn't take the route. And here's why I do kind of fall slightly on Grant's side on this one. It's hard to believe that Lew Wallace had been there for even a few days and had no idea the direct road to Pittsburgh. He would have had his couriers would have had to go. The captain that Grant sends back to Crump's gets there and back in like 3 hours. It's an hour and a half trip, yet Lew Wallace takes all day. So I think the orders, Grant's renowned for writing clear, direct orders, and I'm not entirely sure. I mean, there's certainly better examples of vague orders that he wrote. It wasn't his vaguest order, but it wasn't his clearest either. So I think he does hold some of the responsibility for it. But I do find it hard to believe that you can't blame, I believe you have to shoulder or put some of that blame on Lew Wallace for not showing up earlier on the 6th. In the end, though, it kind of works to Union's advantage in a huge way. His entire division is completely fresh going into the 7th. Had they showed up earlier, the Confederates would have known they're there. They didn't know they were there on the 7th. Does that change the dynamic? So it's one of those things where it worked out great. It's just unfortunate that Lew Wallace got hammered. Though, isn't it Grant who gives him technically his most famous post-war job as the governor of New Mexico?
Yep. So Grant
that's kind of a reward, and he becomes relatively famous for a whole Billy the Kid episode.
Well, and he rewards. He gives him all kinds of rewards. After Monocacy, he gives him, secret mission to Mexico.
Since we're talking about secrets,
so he.
Who was me?
So he sends him down to Mexico. He gives him the post in New Mexico. He ends up. Lew Wallace said, I totally forgot about this. Lew Wallace actually wrote a new tactical manual after the war, and Grant actually personally went to the generals that were going to approve it, and he recommended that they pick Lew Wallace's tactical manual. Now, ultimately, they pick Emory Upton's, but Emory Upton also gets a recommendation from Grant.
I bet you haven't got a picture of him, though, have you, Tyler?
I can't do that to him. Give me a minute. I'll do that. Yeah. I'll work on an Upton one right now. Anyway. John Pope.
You know what? The funniest one is the Ben.
Wounds.
He looks like
just upset the women.
He looks like the Trunchbull from the old Matilda movie.
Yeah.
Oh my God, he does.
You definitely would put on his head.
I dated myself a little bit there.
There's Stephen Lang.
That one's pretty
Shot
good
at
too.
Gettysburg.
Yep.
John Reynolds.
I like
Oh
that.
my
Joe
God.
Hooker, the Joe Hooker.
I've just created a new word, hooker.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, the
Yeah.
smiling generals are great.
Yeah.
You have any other requests before I
Hang on a
stop doing
minute.
this?
Just a quick movie quote
Oh,
with
yeah.
John Reynolds. What goes, John? There's a devil to pay.
I told you there is no time for that.
Can you hold?
Throughout
I think I
broad
can.
extent of the country through
Every
which we
time
have
you
walked.
put the Halleck, I think of the Disney.
Right, anyway,
That
we
Matters.
always finish with a joke, don't we?
We
Tyler?
do.
Yeah.
We do. And I think Anthony has
Dad
to
jokes.
get ready to head us out tonight.
Anthony's going to finish us with a dad joke.
But since I told you there is no time for that.
There you go.
That's
Granny
right.
Lee.
2 pieces of toast. We're ready to get married.
God.
Well,
Everything was going great until it came time to toast the bride and groom.
oh dear. Actually, your joke the other day on Facebook was quite
You
funny.
don't even get a smirk for that one.
The coaches.
What did Tennessee?
Same
Not
thing.
what Arkansas.
Same as Arkansas.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Don't give up your day job, mate.
Good.
Well, that's all. Hold on, we gotta get our next video for next week. So everybody point at Anthony again because he's just our default pointer. Go ahead.
Oh, I've got a really funny one. Why
All
are
right.
balloons expensive? Inflation.
I'm sorry, that was actually good. Everybody point at Anthony for me really quickly so we can get our picture for next week. And one more. Thank you. All right. We'll make sure we
Pointing
use
at
that as-
Anthony and Darren.
Darren's inflation one was actually pretty
I
good.
win.
Wait,
You win.
wait.
Nicked you off Google.
Singing in the shower is fun until you get soap in your mouth. Then it becomes a soap opera.
Jesus God, that's bad.
Oh.
Oh my God, Anthony.
What do a tick and the Eiffel Tower have in common?
Oh God.
They're both parasites.
That's actually a good one.
You made
That's a
Ben
good
Butler
one,
laugh.
man.
Dude.
They're parasites.
One was funny.
You
know?
made Ben Butler laugh. That's
Parasites.
pretty good.
Anyway, that was a great
What does
episode.
wait, one more. What did the ocean say to the beach?
I don't know. What did he say to the
See you later.
Just waved.
Just nothing. Just waved. Good one.
Come to a place in Northern Virginia. You can hear these all day long.
Yes, you
There
can.
you go.
I can.
Thank God you started this after I moved out. Because you would have been, if we started this and you would have been testing the jokes on me while I'm trying to play COD or Rocket League, and I would have been mad. Shut the door. Go away.
On that note,
Yeah, Nate, Tim, thank you guys for coming back on tonight.
Yeah,
It's always
thanks
good
a
to
lot.
have y'all on here. You're welcome back anytime we have a conversation. So let us know when you're free. We'll try to get another one of these. Otherwise, everybody have a great weekend. It's Easter weekend, so if you celebrate, happy Easter weekend. We'll see you
bye,
guys
Charles.
on the next one when we go live again. That is Unfiltered Conversations.